That's good. All right, so welcome everyone. We have an incredible panel discussion today regarding the topic of women and girls as servant leaders. On our panel is Kristen Hodges, Dejanay Lang, Daria Maldovan, and Damaris Sanchez. And my name is Dr. Dan Kuchinka, and just want to thank everyone for coming today. We've got a really great panel discussion prepared for you. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Kristen. And Kristen, don't forget to unmute if you're there.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just chatting away and didn't even unmute myself.
So a quick note right there I forgot to mention is we do have everyone's bio over here, but that's if you want the PowerPoint, or just press pause if you watch the recording later. All right, thanks, Kristen.
All right, well, let me start over. So I'm so excited to be a part of tonight. I really am passionate about women in servant leadership and what I think it can do for our communities. And as we start tonight, I just have the first two bullets here where it's just talking about how men and women are different, right? I think we know that, but if we think about it for a few minutes and maybe how it goes into point number two here, how maybe we've crafted this idea of leadership as a very male role. And so when we're looking at men and women, you know, we can kind of maybe look around at a party and we can see women, we chat and we're kind of right in each other's faces and we're telling all the details and all the, you know, feelings and anything else. Or maybe men at parties, they're kind of shoulder to shoulder and they're doing something. And we just kind of have these differences on how we relate to other people. And we can fall into the, you know, the arguments on, is this innate? Is this learned? Right? So girls, do we naturally, you know, just kind of play with our teapots and our tea parties when we're girls and snuggle baby dolls, or is it because we're rewarded for these ladylike behaviors? Whatever it is, from after children and we grow up, we tend to have these very kind of different gender roles that we function, right? There's very specific behaviors that we kind of expect of men, and there's very specific behaviors that we expect of females. Well, what happens then is men have been the ones in predominantly our roles in leadership, and women are stepping more and more into those leadership roles, but men still hold especially senior leadership positions. And so when we think of leadership, right, when we create this mental image of what does leadership look like, we tend to think of these representations that are more typical of male behaviors than of female behaviors. And that's just because of our experiences. So if you take a second and you think of what is a leader, right? So unless you've learned all the servant leadership stuff, right? But what is a leader? Maybe you think of somebody who's, you know, independent and assertive and aggressive. I know I did before I learned about servant leadership because that was my experience. So if anyone said to me, you know, Kristen, you're a leader, you could be a leader, I thought, oh my goodness, no, I can't. I am not independent and I'm not assertive and I, you know, that's just not how I function. So therefore, I really believed that I wasn't a leader. And what happens is women who do want to step into leadership roles, they tend to model or imitate their experiences. Well, if their experiences have been with men, then those are the behaviors that they're going to try to do. Now, it may be not be natural, it might not be comfortable, but they might try to emulate that. They might try to lead from a position in which they try to be opinionated or aggressive or independent, or any of these traits that they think is what it takes to be a leader, but that doesn't really work out so well. Next slide, please. I didn't know if you were wanting to do, Dan, or if you want me to do it. Okay. And when we get into women, when we look at it and they're trying to lead like men, we find that there's something called gender congruency or discrimination. And gender congruency, if something's congruent, it aligns with what we think it should be. And in gender congruency, we think women should act like what we've always learned women behave. Well, if women try to behave independent and assertive and domineering, then that's incongruent with what we think their gender role should be. And so what happens is they can actually face discrimination and pushback from it. When they try to behave as a man would behave, they're actually judged as rated as less efficient, they're rated as less effective, they're rated as less favorable than men who display exactly the same behaviors. And so when we're looking at servant leadership, the really, really nice part of it is that women can learn how to step into these leadership roles while still being behaving in ways that are gender congruent. And so in servant leadership, what are some of the primary focus? Well, the main one here is the well-being of the follower, right? And so you're looking at your followers and you're checking in and you're making sure that they're doing okay and they're being supportive. How's their mental health? How are they dealing with the recent loss of a loved one, or how are they dealing with they do face a double blind. How are they dealing with oh, sorry, so another comment coming in. And maybe it's how they're dealing with stepping into roles that they want to. Are you focused on their psychological health, on their professional health? Women are also very naturally relational. Okay, so remember in the beginning we were talking about how women like to sit and face-to-face and have those conversations. And because servant leadership embraces this highly interactive relational style, that can be a really nice fit for women. Not only does it feel kind of natural, that can just be a kind of a natural fit for her, but then because she's behaving in gender congruent ways, she can actually receive favorable ratings in the workplace because she's behaving as we kind of have this tendency to believe women should behave. Servant leadership is also very focused on having compassion for each other and collaborating. Again, those are roles that tend to be seen as what we call communal roles. Anything you think of as typical, yeah, throw them out. Anything that you see as typical female kind of traits, those are what we call communal behaviors. Things like being forgiving and focus on a community. Empathy is also a big part of servant leadership, and females tend to have that in spades. And I know I'm generalizing a bit here when I say that, but when we think of the difference between males and females, that just tends to be a trait that's very gender congruent for women. And empathy, remember, is being able to step into the shoes of the other person, right? Sympathy is, I'm sorry that happened to you. Empathy is trying to recognize how that might feel for the person going through it. And by allowing women to see that these are leadership behaviors, then they can step into these roles and they can behave as a little more comfortably without the pushback. Now, I do have another point on here where it's talking about men in servant leadership. And, this whole presentation is about girls, so why on earth am I mentioning men? Well, in the beginning of the presentation, I was talking about how women and men, but we all form this kind of mental representation of what leadership should look like. And if you think of your mental representations, like if I say the word restaurant to you, right, you have a mental representation of what that would look like. There's tables and there's somewhere to order, and there's chairs and there's food and there's whatever it might be. We create those all the time based on our experience. Well, when men are in leadership positions, as men are predominantly the ones in leadership positions, as they embrace servant leadership and they start behaving it with these more communal behaviors, then it'll actually allow women the opportunity to create mental representations a little bit differently, a little bit more in line with their own behaviors. And I would even argue that as women are able to see a different perspective of what leadership looks like, that they'll be more willing to step into those roles because it aligns with their own perception of who they are and what their behaviors are. That's what I have. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we go on?
Panel members, do you got any thoughts or comments? All right, well, let's go ahead and we'll transition over to Jacinda. And as you panel members, if you would please, just as we're moving right on, feel free to unmute and chime on in. Hi, Jacinda.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to continue on a little bit more. I might step on Kristen here in some of my topics, but the first thing I'm going to go into is women and girls in professional settings. A lot of times we have been in situations where we have seen women sometimes fall in the background, not because we don't have the same criteria, the same education, or the same capabilities as men or our counterparts, but simply because it has been that we are unequal in pay, unequal in the same amount of roles. Even as we speak, we are here as pursuing industrial organizational psychology. a lot of times, sometimes we can see more males or in certain counterparts in medical fields or even certain industries such as construction and the military as well. Within my background, this has been extremely intricate, especially because I've been put in a lot of male-dominated fields. This became extremely relevant to me because I was able to see women lead. And by that, I was able to experience true mentorship. It wasn't until 1993 in the United States Air Force that we seen the first female pilot, and she was able to take over a combat unit. She also was able to mentor many other female pilots that we now see today. In my own personal experience, I worked in the industry of construction as a project administrator. I had a true boss who once sat me down and was able to mentor me through the entire process and lead me to becoming a project manager. She also stepped out in this business and was able to effectively bring more women into the industry, as well as other groups outside of the industry to do work within the communities. As we know, within servant leadership, mentoring can be extremely important for organizations. It has proven to improve communication, relationship building, engagement, and productivity upon employees, as well as it can help with the quality of our work. We also can understand, for example, our personal life. We have to think that we don't just go every day and we work 8 hours a day and everything is just work, 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 work. At some point, we leave work and we say, we're going to go home. Maybe on the weekends, you go to church with your family, or maybe you sponsor a sports team. How can servant leadership be important in your personal life? A lot of things that we do, we don't even constantly realize, but especially heavy religions people or even spirituality, we carry all those servant leadership roles with us, whether it's integrity, honesty, listening. Active listening can be extremely important, whether we're in our personal lives, when we're sitting down and we're actively listening to our friends who maybe just need a shoulder to cry on at that moment, or in our workplace when we're simply actively listening to a coworker who might have a problem. At that moment, if we step outside of ourselves and give them a personalization, we can understand and help effectively reduce stress, as well as the treatment between each other coworkers.
Sorry,
Kristen,
I
you
have
have
a
something?
question. Yeah, I have a
Go ahead.
question. So you keep talking about our active listening. Is there any examples that you could tell us or help us understand how we can display active listening?
Absolutely, Kristen. So within our group, actually, would be a great one. We were, first of all, I had to practice with Dr. Dan on Saturday morning. I mentioned to him an example that actually I was going to use for tonight. And it wasn't until I fully sat down and talked to him and I was talking about the side of the impacts that men and obviously women can bring to this group. I mentioned how we sometimes have seen women be targeted or less than. It wasn't until he came to me and said, this presentation, although it might be about women, we want to make sure we set the tone. We want to make sure the tone is effective so that other men in the room don't feel necessarily attacked. And it wasn't until then that I actively had to listen and pay attention to all the advice that he was giving me, that it really made a difference, because I had to go back and sit down and really regroup some of my thinking for tonight. So sometimes it really can just be as something as simple as advice. It could also help be with a project. Say you're in school right now, if you're another student here, we all know that group projects sometimes can be a little more stressful than working solely alone. You have to rely on other people. You have to rely on making sure they actually get their part done, but you also have to rely on their input. And so sometimes we can take the stress off ourselves if we simply just actively listen in the beginning and hear what they might tell us. I can do these things well. If we listen to those parts, kind of what we did with this presentation, we listened to Dara when she told us she's really good at putting PowerPoints and presentations together. She would love to do this. We actively sat back and listened to her and allowed her to tell us how she wanted us to deliver the information to her. So we can take that and carry that not only into our professional settings, but also our personal lives. We can tremendously improve our personal relationships, sometimes even with partners and friendships, like I said, if we were solely going to go ahead and listen. Vicky, go ahead.
I apologize. I pushed it by mistake. I apologize.
Okay, it's fine. But to further go on, the advantages and disadvantages for women. Servant leadership has a big role for all of us that's in this room tonight. However, when women take on servant leadership, we do body some qualities like Kristen mentioned earlier, like empathy. Sometimes women come across naturally more empathetic. We sit down and we can kind of bear the weight of what someone else is saying. It plays a big role for us, especially in leadership, because we have that ear to come to. We made a little safer with the open door. It's also important because it encourages people to build that trust and build those type of relationships. It helps push us forward, almost giving us a little bit of an edge. It also helps people grow within the organization because now we're allowed to collaborate, we're allowed to sit down and communicate openly and freely. But what it also does for the organization is it helps the organization serve their business and customers better. Because ideally, the whole idea of an organization is you want your market or your target audience to win. When you imply and input these servant leadership advantages and roles in, we can almost see the moment when an organization changes and shifts. Now, the cons can be that, like right now, a conversation, say we went back and forth about all the thousands of advantages and disadvantages, it could tremendously make this presentation much longer, which could actually happen on the norm with servant leadership. Maybe you start implying those qualities and you realize now my conversation isn't 5 minutes, it's a little longer because you're sitting down and you're really actively listening, like we spoke about earlier. We're getting all the details. All of the organization is really coming together. Servant leadership also may require an organization to retrain more often. You might have to sit down and train your supervisors in this, train your managers in this, your executive. But it might just change the type of environment that you have overall. We understand that it can, in time, be more costly because you now have to implement so much more training. But in the end, you are winning. Thank you, Doctor. The role of leadership is also lessened. And what I mean by this is when you have a servant leader, now we have to stop and think about the type of roles you have in an organization. You might see managers, you might see executives, supervisors, but when you have servant leadership, now there can just be someone who doesn't necessarily hold the role as a manager, but now they're stepping up and holding the full qualities of what you see in a leader. Because there's a very big difference between a leader and just a manager. You have to keep in mind with this whole thing that you don't have to be a manager to hold that title, to hold the weight of being a servant leader. It's important that we have the honesty between us and the integrity between us to feel that we can share that weight and share that shift. So when we think of those things, when I mention integrity, Kristen mentioned the men in the group. How can everyone help empower women? Sometimes men get placed in roles. They have the knowledge, but you may have a female counterpart in your organization. She may not be an executive. She might not even be a manager. She could just simply be a student intern. However, maybe you know that she has more of the knowledge that you need for an upcoming project. You now have that chance and the integrity to step forward and say, let me bring in this counterpart to go forward and collaborate with, to go ahead and serve this organization. When you do things like that, not only are you serving and showing servant leadership qualities, but you're also helping better the organization in the end. Yes, you may have taken a step back from your role as a manager or leader, or what your expectations might have been, but now in the end, you gave the organization a better quality of work because you gave firsthand knowledge. So with that being said, we want to keep all those things in mind Pushing forward. 1 second. So this is just.
Say, Dejanay, before you continue here, you responded. Thank you so much for responding to that question about how men can play a role in being more supportive of women. I'm just curious from the rest of the panel, Kristen, Daria, Damaris, do you have any comments as well of maybe how can men play a role of being more supportive for women as servant leaders? And don't forget to unmute.
So I can speak to that. So a lot of the leadership research is showing us that the two main ways that people learn leadership roles and is by the mental representation and by modeling directly those behaviors, both of which have to do with experience. And so when a female is around, whether it's male or female leader, and they're demonstrating these very kind of unique characteristics and behaviors of servant leadership, then what happens is the girl internalizes that as her cognitive representation, and it gives her a very good direct example of those behaviors to model. And so when she's stepping into leadership roles, then she kind of has this cookie cutter recipe, like, oh, to be a leader, and I don't want to step on Dejanay, but I should have good listening skills, or I should be empathetic. And so by being able to do that, not only does she have this kind of cookie cutter recipe for behaviors that align with what her behaviors are, but it's easier actually for her to see herself as a leader, because the research also tells us that the closer she sees herself to what the leader's doing, the more that she'll actually believe that she's a leader. So as men are kind of embracing these characteristics of more communal behaviors and modeling them, that literally is the easiest way for women then to be able to see what they should be doing to be a leader, and as well to recognize that they are a leader, to perceive that they're a leader themselves.
Thank you, Kristen. And just a follow up from what you were stated during the beginning of the presentation, I wonder, what do you think about perhaps men being also maybe less prone to exhibit some servant leadership characteristics, because maybe they feel compelled that they need to be more assertive, or some of these things that are not so much servant leadership. So I don't know if you've read any of that in your findings as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really have. So first, it's much more common for females to display servant leader behaviors than men. It's just kind of, that makes sense. It goes in line with kind of our natural, what's innate and what we've been taught, that we act appropriately, right, as a male or female, these behaviors. But the interesting thing is, men are actually starting to embrace more and more of what we call these communal behaviors, these more typical female behaviors. And men are more likely to see these female behaviors that they're displaying. And I know that's not, sounds awkward, but those communal behaviors is what I'm talking about. Men are more likely to see these behaviors of servant leadership, that when they do display them, they still recognize that that's leadership, where females are still struggling with it. And so females might go, well, yeah, I do listen, or I am empathetic, but I'm not a leader, because they don't realize that those are leadership behaviors. And so while men are not as likely to demonstrate servant leadership behaviors, when they do, they still recognize themselves as a leader. So I think it's going to be really interesting that as these more relational leadership styles come to the forefront, because it's not just good for women, it's really great for our next generation. Our generation, what are we on now, Z? I don't know if we're starting over yet, but they need these kind of relational leadership style. They don't do well with transactional. And so when we're embracing this, and kind of as we're shifting the paradigm and more men are embracing it, it's going to be really amazing, I think, as we see more women really perceive that they're a leader too.
Fantastic, thank you. Damaris or Daria, do you have any comments that you'd like to add as well?
Dr. Dan, hello everybody. Well, I do have a comment, but I could also say, because I have my slides, that women are paving the way for a new style of leadership that is confident, authentic, and highly effective. And I do have an example that I would like to talk about, but as soon as I go for my slides, that she's a great leadership example.
Great, thank you. So that's a little preview of what Daria has to come. So why don't we go ahead and do this, Damaris, unless you got a quick comment, or just interrupt us. Or yeah, you got your mic, or you don't. So let's go ahead. Let's go back to Dejanay then, and let's continue along. And by all means, panel, just as you have questions and stuff, feel free to interject.
I did have one more thing. I did have one more thing that I wanted to comment on that Dejanay said that I think is so important. we're talking about how great this will be for women and embracing these leadership styles, but she talks about the organizations, and it's really been amazing because servant leadership is at the forefront, more than transactional leadership, transformational leadership, authentic leadership. We can list off this whole laundry list of leadership styles. And what we're finding is servant leadership is blowing them all out of the water in terms of performance metrics that organizations are doing. Servant leadership, you're more likely to have better customer service, you have better retention of your employees, everybody's happier. It's just incredible. So I really wanted to highlight Dejanay's point that organizations are really benefiting from implementing servant leadership. I think that was an excellent point.
Thank you, Kristen. So to continue on, does anybody has any more questions before? So to continue on, Nelson Mandela made a great statement with the qualities that he felt of servant leadership. And he highlighted the word leadership. As you can see, the first word that he used was L for listening, E for emphasizing, A for acting with awareness, D for dedicating time to others, E for empowering others, R for removing doubts, S for serving others, H for helping others with humility, I for interacting with others with integrity, and P preserving. Sorry. Within these qualities, we have to think about, we've spoken a lot about women and organizations. We have to talk about the girls. And when I look at this quote that Nelson Mandela said, it always stops and makes me think about girls. Whether we talk about girls who are brought up in the Girl Scouts or different female organizations, youth groups. I know Kristen is very big on helping youth groups with younger girls. And so that was really one of our driving points behind this. How do we get to help younger girls already hold these qualities so that they don't have to learn them once they jump into roles like a student or with a woman in an organization? How can we already start teaching our younger girls to be more aware, start empowering others? The Girl Scouts is a great example. They start off, they empower each other. We see them collaborate with each other. They definitely try to remove doubt and encourage the younger girls and encourage the younger groups. We also see different female youth organizations out here. We have different groups that we might be familiar with. I'm familiar with Big Brother, Little Sister. I've also had to mentor a younger girl in that organization. It was really important for the younger girl that I was working with to really remove doubt. That was a big one. She was in school, she had a lot of doubt, and she actually reminded me of myself. I might hold my weight in some areas in education, but statistically speaking, for me, I've definitely shied away in some others. But it was really important to play a very big role to let her know that you might not see the outcome you want right now, but don't doubt yourself. Keep pushing. And sometimes all it takes is for us to have a little empathy for our counterparts. The younger girls of this generation right now are going to be our leaders going forward. So why would we wait? Why not give them the qualities and the keys and the tips that we know are successful today? Don't be stingy with your knowledge and your wealth. That's a great part of servant leadership, is that not only do you want to be a great servant leader, but you want to help someone else be a great servant leader. And so we can start by doing that with our younger girls. We don't have to stop there either. Don't be shy. We can also spread the love to our younger boys and counterparts as well. Dario?
Yes, I will continue saying that moving to a servant leadership approach is an important safety culture change. It's a reminder that leaders are not actually in charge of people, but that they are charged with the care of people. Servant leadership is all about caring, because a servant leader will actually put everybody else's well-being in front of their own. A servant leader gives the opportunity to the employee to take control and help others. And when allowed to do so, most employees will do step up to the invitation. As I mentioned earlier, study shows that women are paving the way for a new style of leadership that is confident, authentic, and highly effective. Women tend to practice empathy to understand what others see, think, and feel. They understand and embrace differences and the diversity of thought that will lead to stronger teams. And as I mentioned before, for the next slide, I do have an example in mind, which is Jacinda Arden. And for those who doesn't know who Jacinda Arden is, she's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Her words that they come to mind, and they are so powerful. So they are, you can be empathetic and strong. Raw authenticity and simple kindness will separate Jacinda from other politicians and attract a loyal following. Jacinda is known as a powerful leader, tapping into her humble, empathetic nature for the greater humanitarian good, truly placing her in a league of her own. Because I read so much about her, and she's a great example of what women leadership means, I will continue saying that her words in her book, I Know This to Be True, that we need our leaders to be able to empathize with the circumstances of others, to empathize with the next generation that we are making decisions on behalf of. And if we are focusing only on being seen to be strongest, most powerful person in the room, then I believe that we lose what we are meant to be here for. If someone has a question about Jacinda.
Sorry. I wanted to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt your thought. So I love Jacinda Arden. She is like my servant leader hero. So I know in the midst of COVID, something we've all been facing, and all the world leaders kind of handled the COVID response a little bit differently when they had to shut down, and how they were able to respond to however it was. So whether it was shutting down and protecting their people, to their balancing their economies. Have you seen anything on how Jacinda responded to the COVID pandemic?
Yes, great question. Yes, Kristen, great question, because I follow her on Facebook, and I realized that the message she put out there for everybody was were mobilized and the unity. So in a Face Live, for example, in a Facebook live session on February 29, Arden and Health Minister David Clark emphasized the importance of regular hand washing, explaining what social distancing is and why it matters. Her words were, everything you will all give up for the next few weeks, all the lost contact with the others, all of the isolation and difficult time entertaining children, it will save lives. This conveyed the higher purpose, in my opinion, and meaning to what was being asked as a part of the mobilizing effort. As empathetic connection in particular is a strength of Arden's leadership, and she constantly weaved that into her community efforts. Her Facebook, another example, her Facebook live sessions were remarkably informal, chatty and personable interaction, and in this she constantly engaged in providing direction, explaining the wider significance or higher meaning of the mobilizing effort, and demonstrated an empathetic concern for how others are affected by pandemic. And about unity that I mentioned before, the messages were using terms or phrases such as we, us, all, New Zealanders, a team of 5 million, along with the praising the fact that most people have acted as directed as matter, explaining where to get help for those with possible symptoms, and encouraging people to avoid panic buying of groceries. I think, and I believe that everybody will feel the same, that her message was strong and needed in that time, and this time, of course.
That's wonderful. I really was really impressed, and it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen it, but there have been some articles written about her, praising her for kind of very specific behaviors. And I thought it was interesting because some of the articles I've seen praised her for being compassionate and collaborative in some of the terms you saw, and then the articles themselves actually highlighted that her method was very effective. But because she also was able to lead as we see that women should lead, right? As she was able to stay in that kind of gender congruent role, that's also why she was so highly favored and why people really like her so much, because she kind of stays in that line of what we expect women to be while also being able to use this really effective leadership method. So thank you for pointing her out. She's fantastic.
Indeed, she was, honestly, she was, and it's something else that she did. She personally initiated the knowledge system, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, of course, the level, and everybody recognized her work. And next to Damaris, I believe that she has another great example of women leadership, and she can go forward if she wants.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you all. This is Damaris Sanchez speaking. And today I would like to talk about a very special person. I'm going to present her in a couple of minutes. But before going ahead to move along, did you know that the women servant leaders are called radical? They are called rebel, and they are called fighters and harsh, while on the other hand, the men servant leaders are awarded with the names of assertiveness. They are assertive people. They are strong facilitators. They are advocates, and they are example of what a leader should be. That happened to the person that I'm going to present to you, which is Rigoberta Menchú. Rigoberta Menchú was awarded in 1992 with the Nobel Peace Prize. She's a Guatemalan Mayan human rights activist. And since she was a little girl in Guatemala, she was engaged with her parents and collaborating with them in the coffee plantation. She was picking coffee beans, and she was not only a good example of a servant leader to other children, but moreover to adults as well. She was raised in the Mayan religion and with the Mayan language, Quiche. But despite that, she was so faithful to both to the Mayan religion and to the Mayan language. She made a joint venture with the Catholic Church because she was open. She was very open to other religions. She was open to other concepts. She was open to other discourse. So she made since she was a flexible thinker, she made this joint venture with the Catholic Church, and being a young girl, a teenager, then she decided that despite that she will continue in pro of the rights of the indigenous people, to give them back their land, to allow them to continue with their religions, to allow them to continue speaking their own language, she made a joint venture with the Catholic Church, and she decided to be a Catholic, and she decided also to adopt Spanish as the language that she will now speak for the rest of the world. So again, since a little child, she was already collaborating. She was having true faith in the principles of the religions, and she has a vision. She was not acting by chance or by coincidence. She has a vision that that was with her the rest of her life. Again, to serve the communities, to protect the indigenous communities, not only in Guatemala, but also in other countries like Mexico. Why Mexico? Because she was persecuted in Guatemala, as many servant leaders are, by some politicians and by some very powerful people. because they didn't want to allow the indigenous people to continue speaking their language, to continue with their religions, and they didn't want even to return their lands back to their hands. So since she was, very, very attacked, she had no other choice than to go as a refugee to Mexico. She was exiled. And she didn't waste time. Once she was in Mexico, again, she continued collaborating with indigenous people, caring about them. So that's why I put caring in the other slide. And I also included in the other slide the word forgiving. And I included moral principles such as integrity and character. In terms of forgiving, she's not engaged in criticizing or debating with the politicians of her own country, Guatemala. No, attacking them is not part of her conversation. It's not part of her language. She's very focused. She's very clear. She's very focused in forgiving them and continue moving along, moving ahead, not only in Guatemala, now in Mexico, and therefore in other countries as well. So again, no coincidence, no by chance, she was awarded in 1992 with the Nobel Peace Prize. And I know that I'm telling you one reason why I chose, Rigoberta Menchú as a great servant leader, because she was awarded, she served as an example, as an inspiration to others, but also because when we speak about servant leaders, we always, well, not always, but frequently, we think about servant leaders coming from developed countries, from multinational organizations, from very fancy neighborhoods. And this is not the case of Rigoberta, as I just mentioned to you. So what the message that I'm trying to convey today is that let us look for servant leaders. Let us identify servant leaders in our community, in this university, in our family, in our church. And once we identify them, let's give them recognition, because Rigoberta was very happy, very proud of receiving that Nobel Prize. I know that we cannot give Nobel Prize. It's not in our hands to recognize people with Nobel Prize, but we can recognize people in front of others, letting them know that they are servant leaders. Maybe they don't know what servant leader is. I don't think neither that Rigoberta knows what a servant leader is or what is the official definition of a servant leader. I'm not so sure. I don't think so, that she knows the official definition or that she is a servant leader. So that's not the point. The point is to identify the servant leaders in any community. It doesn't have, again, to be in any fancy place. And let us make a public recognition in order for them and for others to be aware of what is a servant leader.
Wonderful comments. Thank you, Damaris. Rest of the panel, go ahead and what else do you got to say here before we transition into questions and answers from our audience?
I'll jump in here, Dr. Dan. I think I'll tap in to one of the first things Damaris said is when we look at religion, we have to remember that a lot of us can either be religious or you might have a spiritual background. But within that, it molds a lot of our morals and our ethics, such as respect for others, trust, honesty, and forgiveness. Sometimes we don't necessarily think about the fact that those are all servant leadership values. And we dignify our society by all those qualities. We can't exist as a free society, as some might call it. You know, when we look back in the past, if we have no morality or no ethical behavior, societies like that don't really exist, or they tried and they didn't last and work. That's why it's extremely important that we have the understanding that we embrace a combination of science, religion, and the religious principles, such as, coexisting and communicating to prosper. It also just helps us in our day-to-day lives, but it really helps us within organizations. If we can trust who we work with, we're more comfortable. We're more compelled to communicate properly. I'm more compelled to empathize with you at that point. And also to talk about forgiveness. In organizations, we might not always agree with each other. Sometimes you might step on each other's toes. But if you're not able to forgive and you lack that ability, you lack the ability then to resolve conflict, which is ultimately going to result in division within the workplace or even division within a personal relationship.
Well,
The truth well told.
anyone else? So thank you very much. Yeah, well said. Forgiveness, I know for many people in this group right now, forgiveness is a high priority for them, and that's myself included. Well, thank you so much. I tell you what, let's go ahead now and transition. I know there were some questions and individuals that want to make some comments from our audience. So whoever would like to ask our panel any questions, or if you have some comments of your own, feel free to do so. Vicki, did you have some comments? Vicki did, and I can't remember who else, but go ahead.
I was just, so I'm also working on forgiveness. And I'm really kind of stuck in the point of like, okay, I can forgive and I can let go, but where is the balance between forgiveness and setting boundaries so you don't get walked on without it being, because I feel like if you set the boundaries too harsh, it might be not forgiving authentically, but also, you don't want to be walked on as a human.
Ooh, I will take that question. That is such a good one, Vicki. So this is one of my favorite things because forgiveness is really, really, really hard. So you have to remember that forgiveness actually benefits you. When you forgive somebody, it means that you're no longer concerned about the success of the other person or where the other person's going to be. If you've forgiven them and they show up at the same party that you're up, it doesn't bother you. If they're doing really well, it doesn't bother you. That's all forgiveness is, okay? It's a choice to not be focused on them, so you can be focused on your path and your goals, and your emotions aren't wrapped up in whatever another person's doing. That's very, very different than boundaries. Boundaries is essentially saying, I have the right to be safe. I have the right to be treated with respect. I have the right to choose who I'm around. And so you can forgive someone and walk in that forgiveness, meaning that you don't care if they're successful or they show up at a party or who they're hanging out with tonight, right? And you can still choose to limit your time with them. Limiting your time and having that boundary around someone who's not a safe person, who doesn't treat you with respect, who you don't feel good around, that is a completely different thing than forgiveness. Now you said, where is that line? Well, obviously that's going to be a little bit different with each person and each situation. But the line is whatever you choose the line is to be. So if it's somebody who's abusive, maybe they're verbally abusive, maybe they gaslight you, maybe they have some mental health issues, and so because of that, they kind of dump their stuff on you. That may be a person where you choose to limit time altogether. Maybe if it's a family member, you choose to just be around them at holidays. If it's a friend that kind of frustrates you at times, but she's part of the group, maybe you choose to only be around in large groups and you stop inviting her for coffee, right? Like, so you kind of get to decide where that line is and how much you limit yourself, because you do have the right to be treated with respect and appreciated. So draw those boundaries and know that you're still forgiving if you're not concerned what the other person is up to. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
To tag on a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr.
So
To tag on a little bit of what Chris. Oh, go ahead.
we got a little delay there, Dijonay, so that's okay. Dijonay, go ahead, and then Damaris.
To
Okay.
tag on a little bit to what Kristen just said, forgiveness is definitely for oneself. We have to actually understand that when we don't forgive, we start to see things within our own lives maybe at risk. Maybe you experience, you see the division, we see, violence or death, or we see things like financial struggles and different things that we have to think about. Well, within societies, think about the big parts about where we have the United States, for example. We have seen us at many, many different wars. Something we see in the news, whether you try to watch it or you don't try to watch it. Even with the pandemic, we have had leaders come up and say, this is a good thing, this might not be a good thing. But if we didn't fall back and sit here and really forgive each other for maybe the right or the wrong, and really sit back and just learn to work with each other instead, we might actually be in this thing a little longer. So sometimes you have to step out of yourself and really push yourself to forgive, because you don't want to necessarily block your own things that are going on around you.
Very good.
Mark?
Yes, very good one. The reason why I included the forgiveness, is because to be in peace, internal peace with ourselves, to be in peace, to be calm, to sleep better, to live better. It allows us to continue focus to reach our goals, whatever goal it is. But it allows us to spend our energies and our talents to achieve and to attain the goal that we are trying to pursue. Otherwise, again, we will lose that opportunity, and I'm not so sure if we are going to have a second chance to recuperate back that time.
Thank you, Damaris. I would like to, so I don't know, Sabrina, if you have a microphone, but you had a great comment before. You said in your industry or something, I can't remember what you said exactly, but do you have a microphone? Would you like to provide us an example, or you have comments? I don't know if you have a microphone there, Sabrina, where you can unmute and share. There you go. I can't hear you. I saw your microphone unmute, but I can't hear you still, Sabrina. Well, she's working that out. Does anyone else have questions or comments for our panel? Definitely welcome. Yes, Michael.
Desjardins was talking about organizations such as the Girl Scouts and other organizations that were, I guess, melting pots for servant leadership. Recently, the Boy Scouts of America have included girls into their programs. I'm just wondering if you believe, or any of y'all would think that that's going to be better than the Girl Scouts, or it could be a learning example for the Girl Scouts to maybe incorporate more type of skills into their own programs.
I actually seen that when I was doing the research for this. It popped up as an article, and I found it intriguing. So it's funny that you asked, because it goes back to some of the things that me and Kristen mentioned before. Some girls and women naturally hold some qualities, and so I actually think branching the two together can possibly benefit each other, in my personal opinion. Men do have those figures, and boys are even taught to be more authoritative, more assertive. But it also might teach younger girls to necessarily hold your weight, be more assertive, have that confidence. You can be like the boys in the room. You're able to stand and you're able to shine your light just like them. But it also can teach the younger boys in the room, it's okay to be empathetic to those feelings that someone might have. It's okay to sit down and listen a little longer and maybe step aside and understand that your counterpart can and will help you. So I do think, Michael, that it can be beneficial to not only organizations, but just society in general. When we sit and really just benefit from one another and we mold one another, we have a great way of just expanding more than, we have to think about, even though we're talking about in the workplace, but we have to think about our community. Because at the end of the day, our job is our job, But when you step outside that job, we each have a family. We each have things that we love, whether it just be, you might love, like I said, teaching a sports team on the weekend. The Girl Scouts and different things like that, and the Boy Scouts mixed together can and are a big, big part of society. I mean, every time I go outside of Publix, I see them, they're there. So if we start to mesh them together, I think it can rub off.
Those were good thoughts, Dejanae, and absolutely with the modeling and how do we learn some of these behaviors, that could be interesting. I would also add, I'm a researcher by nature. I always have been, and so I think as we're seeing some of these policy changes in the workforce and in children, like with the joining of girls into the Boy Scouts, those kind of things, I would actually caution a little bit too that I hope the research stays with it. And if we're finding that this is not beneficial, that it's actually more beneficial to have separated gender groups at younger ages, that we're able to revert back, and so that we kind of stay in a science evidence-based practices instead of necessarily a politically correct practices.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, that it interests me as well, because it may have been done for political reasons, but the benefits may be great, they may not, who knows, and the vice versa. It'd be great to have more people selling those cookies. So I'm in full support of everyone coming together.
Yes.
So Samoas are my favorite. All right, so we have just a couple more minutes here. Boy, I tell you what, I just want to make a quick comment that I'm so proud of this group and all these participants here today. What a wonderful and meaningful discussion we've had. Would anyone like to just have a few more, couple more comments or questions you might have before we just wrap it up? Anyone else from our panel?
Yes, Doctor. I think that I would like to congratulate you as the servant leader because it was because of you that we are here discussing, talking about the benefits of being a servant leaders and about the benefits of recognizing and awarding the servant leaders in our communities. So thank you very much for allowing me particularly to be aware, first of all, and to learn from you what a servant leader is. And also to identify people like Roberta Mechu, that I'm so proud of her, coming from a very humble, very indigenous group of people that are not recognized publicly. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I think that we should continue conducting more like this, in order to inform people about what a servant leader is and how to recognize them and how to award them.
Well, thank you very much, Damaris, and you're challenging my humility, which is a servant leadership characteristic, and you're challenging that right now. So, but thank you, you just embarrassed me. But this really is about you all, the committee. So thank you so much again. We'll wrap things up here. So Kristen Hodges, Dejanae Lang, Daria Moldovan, and Damaris Sanchez. I just want to thank you all. Wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for attending today. And just feel free to send us emails if you have questions. If you would like this PowerPoint, we're happy to send it to you. Thank you everyone again, and just have a wonderful and blessed evening.